Law enforcement personnel arrived and found a gruesome murder.
2 bodies, a lot of blood. There is a husband downstairs, 10 wounds to his head.
And almost half of his face is obliterated.
And just on the second floor was his wife.
Imagine walking into your family home and finding your father lying dead on the living room sofa. Then imagine discovering that your stepmother had already been murdered upstairs and that no one in the neighborhood had seen the killer enter or leave. This was not a scene from a Victorian crime novel. It happened in Fall River, Massachusetts, on the morning of August 4th, 1892. The victims were Andrew Borden, a wealthy businessman, and his wife Abby. The person who would become the most famous suspect was Andrew's younger daughter, Lizzie. Within days, the entire country knew her name. Within a year, she would stand trial for the murders. And after the jury delivered its verdict, Lizzie Borden would walk out of the courtroom a free woman. But the question would follow her for the rest of her life. Did the jury uncover the truth, or did the truth disappear somewhere inside the Borden house? In 1892, Fall River was a growing industrial city located about 50 miles south of Boston. Its textile mills had made the city prosperous, but that prosperity was unevenly distributed. Wealthy mill owners and established Protestant families lived alongside thousands of Irish, Portuguese, French-Canadian, and other immigrant workers. The city was divided by class, religion, ethnicity, and geography. Andrew Jackson Borden belonged to Fall River's established upper class. He had investments in mills, banks, and real estate. But despite his wealth, Andrew was known for living modestly. The Borden family home stood on 2nd Street, near the center of the city, rather than in Fall River's more fashionable residential district known as the Hill. Inside that house lived Andrew, his second wife Abby, his daughters Lizzie and Emma, and the family's live-in servant, Bridget Sullivan. Lizzie was 32 years old. Emma was 41. Neither daughter was married, and both still lived at home. The family's private relationships were more complicated than the respectable exterior suggested. Lizzie and Emma had grown distant from their stepmother. The sisters reportedly believed Abby had received property and financial advantages from Andrew that should have belonged to them. There were also disagreements over where the family lived and how Andrew managed his money. But none of these tensions amounted to proof of murder. They simply established something investigators would later struggle to define: a possible motive, but not a demonstrated one. On the morning of August 4th, Emma was away visiting friends in Fairhaven. That left Andrew, Abby, Lizzie, and Bridget inside the house. John Morse, the brother of Andrew's first wife, had also visited that morning. He left the house before the murders were discovered. According to historical accounts, Bridget was ill and resting after washing windows. Andrew left the house for his usual business rounds. Abby remained inside, and Lizzie was somewhere on the property. By late morning, 2 members of the Borden family were dead. The first victim was Abby Borden. She was found in the 2nd floor guest bedroom, face down on the floor. The medical evidence indicated that she had been struck repeatedly with a sharp-edged weapon. The exact circumstances of her death were difficult to establish, but investigators believed she had been attacked earlier in the morning, before Andrew returned home. That detail would become crucial, because when Andrew came back, the killer was apparently still able to remain inside the house. Andrew entered the home sometime after 10:30. He lay down on the sitting room sofa. Not long afterward, he was attacked. His face had been struck so severely that the injuries immediately made the crime scene almost impossible to comprehend. The family's servant, Bridget Sullivan, was not in the sitting room when it happened. Lizzie later said she had been outside near the barn. She eventually entered the house and discovered Andrew's body, she called for Bridget, who came downstairs. Lizzie then sent Bridget to find a doctor. When the doctor could not immediately be located, Bridget sought help from a nearby neighbor. The alarm spread through the neighborhood. Abby's body was discovered upstairs shortly afterward. The murders had taken place in daylight, inside a home located near a busy part of Fall River, yet no neighbor reported seeing a stranger enter. No one saw a person flee. There was no confirmed robbery, and the house showed no obvious sign of forced entry. The crime scene seemed to point in two directions at once. Either the killer had been someone the victims knew, or someone had managed to enter and leave without attracting attention. At first, police searched for an outsider. They arrested a Portuguese immigrant named John Morse, but he was released after investigators determined he was not responsible. This early suspicion was shaped by the atmosphere of Fall River itself. Police initially imagined the killer as a foreign laborer, an outsider who had entered the house for revenge or robbery. The possibility that the killer was a wealthy Protestant woman from one of Fall River's established families was much harder for many people to accept. But gradually, attention turned toward Lizzie. Lizzie's behavior after the murders became one of the most discussed parts of the case. She gave investigators different accounts of where she had been and what she had heard. At one point, she said she had been in the barn. At another, she indicated that she had been nearby when her father returned. Her answers appeared inconsistent to investigators. Her emotional reaction also attracted suspicion. Police officers and reporters expected a visibly grieving daughter. Instead, Lizzie appeared controlled and difficult to read. But emotional behavior is not physical evidence. A person can respond to shock in ways that appear strange, especially when surrounded by police officers, neighbors, physicians, and reporters. The strongest suspicion came from the inconsistencies in Lizzie's account and the absence of another obvious suspect. There was also a story involving prussic acid, a highly dangerous poison. The prosecution later argued that Lizzie had attempted to obtain the chemical from a local drugstore shortly before the murders. Her defense claimed that the incident had been misunderstood and that the chemical had not been purchased. The matter became part of the growing public case against her, but it still did not prove that she had killed anyone. Investigators searched the house and cellar. They recovered several axes and hatchets. The prosecution attempted to connect one of these tools to the murders, yet the case did not produce a clearly established murder weapon covered in identifiable blood. A Harvard chemist testified that tests conducted on some of the weapons did not provide the result prosecutors needed. Lizzie's clothing was also examined. A dress she had worn around the time of the murders contained no obvious bloodstains that could conclusively link her to the killings. The prosecution had suspicion. It had circumstantial evidence. It had an unusual household, a possible family conflict, and a suspect whose statements seemed difficult to follow. But it did not have an eyewitness. It did not have a confession, and it did not have a piece of physical evidence that placed the weapon in Lizzie's hands. 5 days after the murders, officials held an inquest. Lizzie was called to testify over 3 days. It was the only time she testified under oath during the case. The circumstances were unusual. She was questioned without a defense lawyer present in a closed proceeding. While investigators were already considering her a suspect, her answers were examined line by line. She described discovering her father. She discussed her movements around the house. She answered questions about Abby's whereabouts and about the morning's events. To investigators, her testimony created more uncertainty than clarity. To her supporters, the questioning itself was unfair. There was another problem. Lizzie belonged to a respectable Protestant family in a city where class and ethnic divisions were already producing conflict. Some people found it nearly impossible to believe that a woman of her social background could commit such a brutal crime. Others believed her privileged position had protected her from suspicion during the most important early hours of the investigation. The case became more than a murder investigation. It became a debate about class, gender, immigration, respectability, and the meaning of justice. On August 11th, 1 week after the murders, Lizzie Borden was arrested. She was held in jail for approximately 9 months while the legal case developed. The arrest transformed the story into a national sensation. Newspapers followed every detail. Women's organizations and supporters defended Lizzie. Critics portrayed her as cold, calculating, and protected by wealth. The public had already begun forming its verdict. The trial had not even started. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. The state argued that Lizzie had the opportunity to commit both murders. She was present in the house. Emma was away. Bridget was upstairs or outside during the critical periods. The victims were killed in separate rooms, roughly an hour and a half apart. That suggested the killer had knowledge of the home and confidence that no one would interrupt the attacks. Prosecutors also focused on Lizzie's shifting statements. They presented the prussic acid story. They described the tensions within the Borden household, and they attempted to show that Lizzie's behavior after the murders was not consistent with innocence. One of the most damaging witnesses was Alice Russell, a close friend of Lizzie. Russell testified about an incident in which Lizzie appeared to burn a dress after the murders. The defense argued that the dress had been stained with paint. The prosecution suggested that Lizzie had destroyed clothing that might have contained blood. Even this testimony, however, was open to interpretation. There was no confirmed blood analysis, proving that the dress had been used during the murders. There was no witness who saw Lizzie holding a hatchet, and there was no person who saw her attack either victim. The defense attacked the investigation itself. The house had been crowded with officers, family members, neighbors, and curious onlookers. The crime scene had not been preserved according to modern forensic standards. People moved throughout the property. Evidence was handled according to 19th century practices. Investigators did not have DNA testing, blood pattern analysis, or the forensic tools that modern audiences now expect. Even the central image of the case was not as simple as the legend suggested. The famous rhyme says, Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. But Abby was Lizzie's stepmother, not her biological mother, and the weapon was more likely a hatchet, a smaller tool, than the full-sized axe imagined by popular culture. The rhyme made the story memorable. It did not make the evidence stronger. Lizzie Borden's trial began in New Bedford on June 5, 1893. It lasted approximately 2 weeks. The courtroom was packed. Reporters followed every detail, turning every expression and gesture into possible evidence. The prosecution attempted to present Lizzie as a woman who had quietly planned the murders. The defense presented her as a respectable daughter caught in a terrible misunderstanding. The trial repeatedly returned to the same central problem. Suspicion was not the same as proof. Lizzie's defense attorneys emphasized the lack of direct evidence. No one had seen her commit the murders. No murder weapon had been conclusively identified. No clothing had been proven to contain the victim's blood, and the state could not establish a motive beyond general family tension and speculation about money. The prosecution's case was serious, but it depended on the jury accepting a chain of inferences. Lizzie was present. The house was secure. Her statements changed. She had allegedly attempted to obtain poison. She behaved strangely. A dress may have been destroyed. Each fact increased suspicion, but none of them, alone or together, created an unbreakable chain. The jury deliberated briefly before returning with its verdict. Lizzie Borden was found not guilty of murdering her father. She was also acquitted in the death of her stepmother. The courtroom reportedly erupted in relief and applause. Lizzie had been legally cleared, but legal acquittal did not erase public suspicion. In the eyes of many people, the verdict meant only that the prosecution had failed to prove its case. It did not necessarily mean that the public believed Lizzie was innocent, and that distinction would define the rest of her life. The haunting truth behind the Lizzie Borden case is not that the famous rhyme solved the murders. It is that the rhyme replaced the evidence. For more than a century, people have repeated the image of Lizzie as a hatchet-wielding murderess. But the historical record is more complicated. She had an opportunity. She may have had family conflicts that investigators considered significant. Her testimony contained inconsistencies. Some of her behavior appeared suspicious, and the murders occurred inside a house where she was present. Those facts explain why police arrested her. They explain why prosecutors believed they could convict her. But the record also contains major gaps. No eyewitness saw the attacks. No confession was ever produced. No definitive murder weapon was established. No forensic discovery conclusively placed Lizzie at either crime scene during the attacks. The result is a case suspended between legal fact and cultural certainty. Legally, Lizzie Borden was not guilty. Historically, the identity of the killer remains unresolved. That does not mean every theory is equally convincing. It means the evidence does not justify presenting suspicion as certainty. Lizzie lived under that suspicion until her death in 1927. She returned to Fall River after the trial and lived a private life, but she could never return to the life she had before August 4th, 1892. Her name had become a symbol. Her face became permanently attached to an unsolved crime, and the house where the murders occurred became one of the most famous crime sites in America. The case remains haunting because the verdict ended the trial, but not the mystery. Perhaps Lizzie Borden committed the murders and escaped conviction because the investigation was too limited to prove it. Perhaps someone else entered the house and disappeared into the confusion that followed. Or perhaps the truth was lost in the first hours, when the scene was disturbed and suspicion moved faster than evidence. What happens next is not a folktale. It is a documented legal case. A case in which one woman was condemned by the public, acquitted by a jury, and remembered forever as something the law could not prove. If you made it this far, thank you for watching and for keeping these stories alive. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because next time we're uncovering a true story even darker than this one. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and never forget to say thank you. Thanks for watching.